The night it all began. Everything felt so ordinary it was almost poetic in hindsight. I came home late from work, juggling a half-eaten sandwich and a stack of paperwork I promised myself I wouldn't bring home. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels forced, like someone's trying too hard to make things seem normal. My wife, Emma, was sitting on the couch with her laptop open, a glass of wine by her side. She barely glanced up when I walked in. "Long day?" I asked, trying to gauge her mood. She nodded, her response clipped. "Yeah, just catching up on emails." I shrugged it off and headed to the kitchen, but something tugged at me. Emma wasn't usually this distant. For years, she was my sounding board, the person who could make even the worst days feel bearable. But lately, it felt like we were living parallel lives, just brushing past each other without really connecting. I convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was just a phase, a rough patch like every couple goes through. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband, the guy who reads too much into things. But then, as I was putting my briefcase down, I heard her mutter something under her breath. "What's that?" I called out, stepping back into the living room. Emma jumped, snapping her laptop shut with a force that made the wine glass tremble. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just work stuff." Her face turned red, and she fumbled to change the subject. My stomach churned. There was something there, a crack in her armor, but I didn't press. Not yet. Later that night, Emma went to bed early, claiming a headache. I stayed downstairs, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, replaying the scene in my head. Something about the way she shut her laptop felt off. I glanced over at the couch where she'd left it, the screen tilted slightly open like it was inviting me in. For a moment, I hesitated. This was her personal space, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go down that road. But then I thought about the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the way she avoided my eyes when I asked simple questions. My hand moved before I could stop myself. I opened the laptop. The screen blinked to life, and there it was, a chat window, still open. The messages were casual at first, the kind of banter you'd expect between friends. But as I scrolled up, my breath caught. The tone shifted, becoming flirtatious, then intimate. The name at the top of the chat read Ryan. My heart pounded as I read the words, "I can't wait to see you again. Today was perfect." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Who was Ryan? What had they done today? A million questions flooded my brain, each one heavier than the last. I scrolled further, my hands trembling, piecing together a story I didn't want to believe. This wasn't just a friend. This was something more. Something I couldn't ignore. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to know everything first. And in that moment, staring at those messages, I knew my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. I sat there, frozen, as the weight of what I just read began to sink in. The house was eerily quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking through my thoughts. My hands trembled as I scrolled up through the conversation with Ryan, desperate to piece together how deep this went. The messages were a mosaic of stolen moments and shared secrets. Lunches, quick meetups at a park near her office, a mention of a hotel that made my stomach churn. My brain fought to make sense of it, clinging to the possibility that this was all a misunderstanding. But the words on the screen told a different story, one of intimacy, of trust being shared with someone who wasn't me. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every little moment from the past few months that now seemed suspicious. Her suddenly working late, the new perfume she started wearing, the way she'd stopped asking about my day. It wasn't just hindsight. These were the red flags I'd ignored, dismissing them as paranoia. But now I knew. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. The rest of the night was a blur. I barely slept, my mind racing with questions and scenarios. Should I confront her now? Demand an explanation? But what if she denied it? What if she twisted the story? No, I needed more than just words on a screen. I needed undeniable proof. The next morning, I decided to keep playing along, pretending I didn't know. Emma acted normal, too normal. She hummed softly as she made her coffee, her hair still damp from the shower. I watched her closely, studying every move, every word. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked, glancing at me over her mug. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a bit restless." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and turned back to her phone. I noticed how quickly she closed the screen when I walked by, her body stiffening ever so slightly. It was subtle, but now that I was looking for it, I saw everything. Every twitch, every hesitation, every tiny crack in her facade. That evening, when she left for her supposed yoga class, I made my move. I opened her laptop again, this time more methodically, combing through her emails and messages. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't let guilt stop me. Not now. It didn't take long to find more. Emails to Ryan about business trips that lined up suspiciously with the weekends she claimed to be visiting her sister. Photos of them together, candid and carefree, the kind of moments we used to share. And then, a message from Ryan that sent a fresh wave of rage through me. "When can we stop sneaking around? I want you all to myself." My chest tightened. This wasn't just a fling. It wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a full-blown affair. I sat there, staring at the screen, the reality of it all crashing down on me. The woman I'd built my life with, shared dreams with, was living a double life. And she had no idea I knew. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the storm inside me building. Part of me wanted to storm out of the house, to confront her the second she walked through the door. But a darker part of me, the part that felt betrayed and humiliated, wanted to wait, to gather more, to make sure there was no way she could deny it. I decided to dig deeper. I placed a small GPS tracker under her car, a move that felt both invasive and necessary. I needed to know where she went, who she met, how far this had gone. It was a line I never thought I'd cross, but Emma had already shattered every boundary we'd built. What was one more? When she came home that night, her smile was as bright as ever. "How was your evening?" she asked, setting her yoga mat by the door. "Quiet," I replied, forcing a casual tone. "Got some reading done." She kissed me on the cheek, the gesture feeling hollow now. As she disappeared into the bathroom, I sat on the couch, staring at the closed door. I didn't know who she was anymore, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The next morning, the tracker pinged its first location, a cafe downtown, one we'd never been to. I followed her from a safe distance, my heart pounding as I parked across the street. Through the large glass windows, I saw her sitting at a table, her back to the door. Moments later, a man walked in, tall, confident, with a smile that made my blood boil. "Ryan." I stayed in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly it hurt. They talked, their faces close, their laughter audible even from where I sat. She looked at him the way she used to look at me, her eyes bright and full of warmth. And that's when I knew this wasn't just an affair. It was something deeper, something she wasn't going to let go of easily. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone. I took photos, my heart breaking with every click of the camera. This wasn't just about catching her. This was about making sure she couldn't spin the story, couldn't manipulate her way out of the truth. When they finally left the cafe, I followed them again, my mind racing with a plan I wasn't sure I had the stomach to carry out. Because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about taking back control. I followed them to a park this time. They walked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, like teenagers in love. The sight was a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease with which she lived this double life. The smiles, the laughter, the subtle touches. It was like watching a stranger wearing my wife's face. Ryan stopped near a bench, pulling Emma closer. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the intimacy so casual it made my stomach churn. I stayed hidden, my body rigid with tension, and snapped a few more photos. Proof. I needed more proof. When they parted ways an hour later, I tailed her back home. She strolled into the house like nothing had happened, kissed me on the cheek, and asked, "How was your day?" Her voice was light, her demeanor unshaken. If I hadn't seen her with Ryan just hours before, I might have believed her. But now, every word she spoke felt like a carefully crafted lie. "Uneventful," I replied, forcing a smile. "Yours?" "Same," she said, disappearing into the bedroom. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall, the storm inside me threatening to break loose. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but one thought stood out above the rest. I can't keep living like this. Something had to give. That night, as Emma slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, formulating a plan. Confronting her now wouldn't accomplish anything. She'd deny it, or worse, twist the narrative to make herself the victim. I'd seen it happen to others. No, I needed to get ahead of her, to make sure she couldn't manipulate her way out of this. I needed to be methodical, calculated. The next day, I called in sick to work. Emma left early, claiming she had back-to-back meetings. The GPS tracker confirmed otherwise. She drove to the boutique hotel I'd seen in their messages, the same one I'd followed her to before. I parked a block away and waited, my heart pounding as I watched her car disappear into the lot. This time, I didn't stay outside. I walked into the hotel, my pulse racing. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I needed to see them together, needed to know how far this had gone. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I strode past, heading for the elevators. I knew the room number from one of Ryan's texts I'd found, 214. As I approached the door, I hesitated. My hands were clammy, my breath shallow. What was I doing? Did I really want to see what was on the other side? But the thought of going back home, pretending everything was fine, made me push forward. I knocked, my knuckles rapping against the door. My heart thundered in my chest as I waited. A few seconds later, the door opened a crack, and there he was, Ryan. His face twisted in confusion when he saw me, his hand gripping the door tightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone guarded. I didn't answer. I pushed the door open, stepping inside before he could react. Emma was there, sitting on the edge of the bed. She froze when she saw me, her face draining of color. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" I looked between the two of them, my anger barely contained. Funny, I was about to ask the same thing. Ryan stepped forward, his expression shifting to one of defensiveness. "I think you need to leave." I turned to him, my voice cold and steady. "You don't get to tell me what to do. This is my wife." Emma stood, her hands shaking. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain what?" I shot back. "That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been sneaking around with him while I was at home trusting you?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. "It's not what you think," she said weakly. "Really?" I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the photos I'd taken of them at the park, the cafe, the hotel. I held the screen up for her to see. "Because it looks exactly like what I think." Emma's face crumpled, her hands flying to her mouth. Ryan stepped closer, his posture tense. "All right, that's enough," he said, his tone sharp. I turned to him, my voice low and venomous. "No, it's not enough. You don't get to waltz into my life and wreck it like this. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Michael, please," Emma begged, tears streaming down her face. "Let's just talk. Please." I shook my head, the weight of her betrayal crushing me. There's nothing left to talk about, Emma. You made your choice. I turned and left the room, her sobs echoing behind me. My chest felt hollow, my mind racing with the enormity of what had just happened. For months, I'd been living in a lie, and now that it was exposed, I wasn't sure what to do next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive home felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might crack under the pressure. My mind raced with everything I'd just seen and said, and I still couldn't believe any of it was real. My wife, my partner of over a decade, had been living a double life. And now the truth was out, laid bare for all of us to see. When I pulled into the driveway, the house felt different, colder somehow. I sat in the car for a moment, the silence pressing down on me. What was I supposed to do now? Walk in and act like everything was normal? Or start packing a bag and leave this all behind? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed. It was Emma. Emma, please come back. We need to talk. I stared at the message, my stomach churning. Talk? What was there to talk about? She'd made her choices, and now she wanted to try and explain them away? I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuses she had prepared. The hours crawled by as I sat in the living room, replaying everything in my mind. The way Emma had looked at Ryan, the way she'd pleaded with me in that hotel room. It all felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just sat there, waiting for the next move. Emma came home later that night. I heard her car pull up, the soft click of the door as she stepped inside. My heart pounded as I stared at the wall, refusing to turn around. "Michael," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. She stepped closer, her footsteps hesitant. "Please," she whispered. "I know I've hurt you, but I need you to hear me out." Finally, I turned to face her. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. She looked like a wreck, but I couldn't bring myself to feel pity. "You've got 5 minutes," I said coldly. She nodded, taking a shaky breath. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she began. "It started out as just a friendship. Ryan was someone I could talk to when I felt like I was losing myself. I never planned for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "Losing yourself? That's your excuse? So you decided to find yourself in someone else's bed?" Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that. We didn't." She stopped, her voice faltering. "We didn't sleep together. I swear, Michael, it never got that far." I stared at her, my anger boiling over. "Do you really think that makes it better? That the lies, the sneaking around, the betrayal, are somehow forgivable because you didn't cross that one line? You crossed every other line, Emma." She sank into the chair across from me, her hands shaking. "I know," she whispered. "I know I've destroyed your trust, and I hate myself for it. But I love you, Michael. I never stopped loving you." Her words stung, but they didn't bring comfort. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have spent months lying to my face while you ran off with him." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted, "but I want to try. Please, Michael, I'll do whatever it takes." I sat there in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hope that we could somehow rebuild what we'd lost. But the other part, the part that had watched her with Ryan, seen the way she smiled at him, knew that some wounds couldn't be healed. "You want to fix this?" I said finally, my voice cold. "Then you need to face the consequences of your actions. Pack a bag, Emma. You're leaving tonight." Her eyes widened, panic flickering across her face. "What? Michael, please." "No," I said sharply. "You don't get to beg for forgiveness and expect me to sweep this under the rug. I need space, and you need to figure out who you are without destroying someone else in the process." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll go." She stood and walked upstairs, her footsteps heavy. I heard her moving around, the sound of a suitcase being unzipped. Minutes later, she came back down, her bag in hand. She paused by the door, looking at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for everything." I didn't reply. I just watched as she walked out the door, the sound of it closing echoing through the house. That night, for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but at least I wasn't walking it blind anymore. The silence after Emma left was deafening. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, feeling both relief and an ache I couldn't quite name. The woman I had shared my life with, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had packed her bags and walked out the door. I had told her to go, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The next few days were strange. The house felt emptier than it ever had, even though her absence was exactly what I had asked for. Her things were still everywhere. Her favorite coffee mug on the counter, the throw blanket she always wrapped around herself on the couch. It was like she was haunting the space without actually being there. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to reclaim it, piece by piece. I boxed up her things, not to get rid of them but to clear the air. I moved her photos from the walls, replaced them with landscapes and abstract art that felt neutral, safe. It was therapeutic in a way, a small but important step toward finding myself again. Emma called a few times, but I rarely picked up. When I did, it was only to keep the conversation brief. She was staying at a friend's house, she said, and had started seeing a therapist. "I'm working on myself, Michael," she told me once, her voice hesitant. "I know it's too late to undo the damage, but I'm trying." I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. She'd made choices, and those choices had consequences. It was as simple as that. A month after Emma left, I got a call from Ryan. It was out of the blue, his number flashing on my screen like a challenge. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, my tone sharp. "What do you want?" There was a pause on the other end. "Michael, I wanted to say I'm sorry." I barked out a bitter laugh. "You're sorry? You think that makes any of this better?" "No," he admitted quietly. "I know it doesn't. But I needed you to know that I regret what happened. Emma and it's over. I ended it." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You ended it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You act like you're some kind of victim in this. You walked into my life, into my marriage, and helped tear it apart. And now you want to play the bigger man?" "I'm not proud of what I did," Ryan said, his voice steady. "But for what it's worth, I think she genuinely loves you. She talked about you all the time, about how much she missed what you two had." I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the phone. "Don't you dare try to paint her as a saint," I spat. "You both made your choices, and now you both get to live with them." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt a strange sense of closure. He was out of the picture now, but that didn't change the fact that Emma had let him in to begin with. Emma and I met again a few weeks later to talk about what came next. She looked different, thinner, more tired, like the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. We sat at a cafe, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. "I want to be honest with you," she began, her hands gripping her coffee cup tightly. "I know I can't fix this, but I need you to know how much I regret what I've done." I nodded, my face unreadable. "Why now? Why did it take all of this for you to realize what you had?" She sighed, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't know. I guess I was looking for something, some version of myself that I felt I'd lost. But I see now that I went about it the wrong way. I hurt you in ways I never imagined, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Her words felt sincere, but they didn't change the past. They didn't erase the nights I'd spent agonizing over her lies or the betrayal that still hung like a shadow over everything. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but this isn't something we can come back from, Emma. The trust is gone, and without it, there's nothing left." She nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I understand." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of finality settling over us. "I think it's best if we make this separation permanent," I said. "We need to move on, both of us." She wiped at her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay." The divorce was finalized quietly. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes or bitter arguments, just two people acknowledging the end of a story they'd once believed would last forever. Emma moved out of state, and I stayed behind, determined to rebuild my life. In the months that followed, I found a strange sense of peace. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I'd forgotten about, and even started seeing a therapist to work through the anger and grief. It wasn't easy, but each day felt a little lighter than the one before. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized something. Emma's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, and I had the power to write the next chapter of my life. And so I did.